Hello, I'm Reverend Oliver Snow, your local preacher from the Black Lagoon, and today we are going to be reviewing the third installment of the Knives Out mystery series, Wake Up Dead Man. Now, you might be wondering why I've decided to review this movie when I haven't reviewed the other two, and that is because, firstly, this may actually be my new favorite movie of all time, and secondly, you don't really need to watch the Knives Out movies in order. Each one is a standalone whodunit, with the only real connective tissue between them being the titular detective, Benoit Blanc, played by Daniel Craig. And Benoit Blanc is an absolute delight. One of the things the Knives Out movies are always fantastic at is taking the standard mystery tropes and subverting them in very unexpected ways. These are, at the end of the day, classic murder mysteries in the style of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle or Agatha Christie. They are character-driven pieces, where the primary goal is to gather clues and analyze motives. Because of this, Benoit Blanc is your classic Sherlock Holmes-adjacent autistic-coded detective character. But unlike Holmes and the many characters inspired by him, he never comes across as cold or calculating. Instead, he is portrayed as deeply compassionate and kind. You get the sense that the reason he's as good at his job as he is not just because of his logical ability to analyze clues, but also his empathetic ability to analyze people. Don't get me wrong, he definitely lacks a lot of the social graces, but you get the sense that it comes from either excitability or not really understanding that he's being a bit too honest. When he realizes he's hurt someone's feelings, he's unlikely to continue, and instead becomes a bit embarrassed, which I find very charming. It's this compassionate integrity, as well as his swarthy southern charm, that truly defines Benoit Blanc, and sets him apart from being another Sherlock rebrand. Now, before we get into the real meat of the review, I'm going to have to admit that this is not going to be an entirely spoiler-free review. It will instead be spoiler-free-ish. I'm not going to give away the ending, but in a detective story, pretty much anything is a potential clue. There are a whole lot of blink and you'll miss it scenes that play into the larger mystery, so I can't promise I won't point out something you may have missed otherwise. Overall, though, I want to focus less on the actual mystery and more on the characters within it. If you have watched either of the previous movies in the series, Knives Out or Glass Onion, you know that they always contain a certain level of social commentary. These movies have something to say about people, and more importantly, about power. These social commentaries are never done in a weird or exploitative way either. It's woven intricately and carefully around characters and their motivations. You never feel like you're being beat over the head with the commentary. The commentary just sort of happens as these characters interact with one another. Characters do things because they are greedy, spoiled, racist, or ambitious. Alternatively, they do things because they are desperate, excited, faithful, or misguided. The movies are careful to never label anyone as evil, and with good reason. It deepens the mystery. A character can be abhorrent to you specifically, but that doesn't make them a murderer, nor does it make them deserving of being a victim. Wake Up Dead Man is fundamentally a story about faith, and it gives a realistic and nuanced vision of faith that doesn't shy away from the darker elements of the church. Because of this, Wake Up Dead Man has a noticeably darker and more noir tone than its predecessors. Knives Out and Glass Onion rely heavily on their senses of humor. They have an emotional through line and a lot of heart, but the silly, slapstick quality is always front and center. Wake Up Dead Man lets the silliness take a back seat for a great deal of the film, which I think was an excellent decision for this particular script. Don't get me wrong, there are still plenty of humorous moments, they just aren't as prevalent.
Makes me sick. These kids painting rocket ships all over his sacred resting place.
The colors are darker and more muted, a far cry from the extravagant tropical sets of Glass Onion. The towering grandiosity of the church gives it an almost gothic noir feel. This is also the first movie that lets the sidekick character breathe a bit. The Knives Out movies always have a Watson-esque sidekick character that sort of follows Blanc along during the investigation. Someone who technically could be a suspect, and may even be the primary suspect as far as the police are concerned, but someone who, due to Blanc's aforementioned integrity, the audience can reasonably suspect wasn't the killer. What makes this fun is that there's always a thought in the back of your head that Blanc could have gotten it wrong, that he could have put his faith in the wrong person and is now allowing a potential murderer to follow him around and obstruct the investigation. This character almost always has a very clear motivation to throw the detective off certain paths and hide evidence, which allows an added layer of tension to the case. In this movie, the sidekick is Reverend Judd Duplessis, played by Josh O'Connor. Judd is a young priest with a checkered past, and for the first 40 minutes of the film, you see everything through his eyes. It is Reverend Judd, not Benoit Blanc, who sets up the plot and the characters, and all you get is the information he is willing to give you. Which means, if he has a secret, neither you nor Blanc has access to that information. Throughout this first 40 minutes, you learn about Reverend Judd's backstory, that in a former life he was a boxer who killed a man in the ring, spurring his conversion and eventually his priesthood. Due to a series of unfortunate events, he is assigned to Our Lady of Perpetual Fortitude, a small parish in upstate New York led by the enigmatic Monsignor Jefferson Wicks. And things get weird pretty quickly. Monsignor Wicks is a deeply conservative, fire and brimstone priest, whose primary motivation for his position seems to be the power it gives him over others. He seems to have very little compassion for those around him, instead choosing to pick at the perceived flaws in others, especially women and those he views as sexual deviants. Hovering over this entire story is the seeming motivation for Wicks's behavior. The story of Wicks's mother, who, according to him, was a harlot who conceived him out of wedlock and whose greed and lust eventually led to her downfall. This story, true or not, has been woven into the tapestry of the church to the point of it becoming doctrine. A parable of what happens to those who, according to Wicks, engage in the worst sin of all, stepping outside of the place God ordained for them. Wicks seems to have a preoccupation with sexual sin in general, despite having no issue engaging in it himself. In fact, Wicks seems to take great pleasure in a sort of psychosexual dominance over others. There is a deeply uncomfortable scene where, after asking Judd to take his confession, Wicks proceeds to graphically detail his masturbation habits.
I've masturbated 4 times this week, 4 or 5 generally, and what I say, 6 weeks? Well, let's say 30 times masturbated. This week in my bed, in the morning once in the shower, standing up, which was convenient, just use the bath gel. Oh, once in the middle of the night after a dream about...
That's all right.
About one of those Japanese cat cafes.
Okay.
You know, I read this article, but the cats were girls, and, you know, so... And I hadn't prepared, so I had to finish into a copy of Catholic Chronicle magazine, just what was on the end table, which is probably its own kind of sin. I don't know, maybe not, but not good.
This is framed as a sort of hazing ritual for the new priest, something meant to embarrass him and establish Wicks's dominance over him. The congregation is a ragtag group of characters whose only commonality seems to be that they are desperate enough to listen to Wicks shout obscenities from the pulpit every Sunday. They are all searching for something greater than themselves, something to be a part of, and Wicks gives them that. He gives them a sense of purpose. And in exchange, they never have to change anything about themselves. The relationship between Wicks and his congregation is not one of compassion or guidance, it is instead a mutually parasitic one. Week after week, Wicks promises his congregation a sense of community and easy solutions with no self-improvement. In exchange, the congregation treats him like a prophet and feeds his insatiable ego. This pattern keeps all of them stuck, paralyzed in their worst impulses, slowly becoming worse and worse people, but unable to get free. Every one of these characters character is the type of person that a charismatic but toxic minister might try to sink their teeth into in real life. Desperate people looking for a sense of purpose in a world they feel has treated them unfairly. A single mother conned into raising a child that wasn't hers out of a sense of duty. A divorced man still pining after the woman who left him while growing in his bitterness. An influencer grifting from Wicks's sermons to boost his political career. The obedient secretary, always willing to pander to Wicks's worst instincts for a sense of moral superiority. A jaded writer turned conspiracy theorist hoping Wicks will inspire a new novel. A disabled cellist hoping for a miracle that allows her to play again. Every one of them hold Wicks up as a miracle cure to their woes. And this is something Wicks is more than happy to take advantage of. This leads to Judd eventually lashing out at Wicks during a confrontation about his exploitation of the congregation.
You're poisoning this church. And I'll do whatever it takes to save it. To cut you out like a cancer.
So when Wicks ends up dead from a seemingly impossible crime, Judd seems the most likely culprit. After all, Wicks's congregation loves him. They see him as almost a prophet. But as the story unfolds, not only do we start to see that the congregants have all started to catch on to who Wicks was, but that every last one of them has a motive to murder. This is when Benoit Blanc, our signature detective, arrives on the scene. Blanc is fascinated by this murder, especially since, as stated previously, it seems impossible that any member of the congregation could have carried it out. But Blanc doesn't just serve the purpose of the detective in the story. He's also the stand-in for a non-believer. In fact, Blanc seems a bit disgusted with the institution as a whole, seeing the church as a place that peddles in fairy stories, hatred, and false hope. But when this is brought up to Judd, he doesn't come across as defensive towards Blanc's perspective. Instead, he meets it with compassion and understanding. After all, with the church's history and with ministers like Wicks in the world, how can one not be at least slightly skeptical? It is at this point Judd becomes Blanc's signature sidekick and the audience's POV character. As I said earlier, this review is spoiler-free-ish, and the audience has a pretty good sense from the beginning that Judd is not the culprit. That he is, instead, the scapegoat for the real murderer, and Blanc seems to have a sense of that too. Blanc then has Judd write down the story from his perspective, which explains why it was told from his point of view for the first 40 minutes. The rest of the movie plays out like a standard whodunit, with Blanc and Judd trying to solve the case and prove Judd's innocence. But there is one scene in the movie that takes it from good to great. A scene so masterfully done that it elevates the movie from a well-created mystery to a masterpiece. Blanc and Judd have just found a clue that requires Judd to make a phone call to a local company to get more information on the matter. This has to take place within a certain amount of time. The secretary is particularly chatty, completely unaware that the information she needs to provide has the potential to make or break a murder investigation. Instead, she prattles on as both Blanc and Judd get increasingly annoyed. The scene could easily just be played for comedic relief, but it isn't. Towards the end of the conversation, just as Judd is about to give up, the woman makes a simple request to the priest. She asks him if he will pray for her. She tells them that her mother has dementia and that the dementia has made her mean, that in the exhaustion of her caretaking responsibilities, she snapped back at her mom. Now her mother's condition has worsened and they may never get to make amends.
Hey, Father, could I ask you something?
Yeah, wait, if you can make it quick, this is a priority for us right now.
Maybe she could call you back.
Father Joe, could you...
Louise?
Oh, God.
Louise?
Will you pray for me?
The scene screeches to a halt as Judd simply listens to her, because despite his freedom being at risk, despite there being something so much bigger than this one woman and her problems at hand, she needs him. She needs someone to listen. She needs a priest. In this moment, the murder investigation melts away. You just spent 40 minutes of this movie seeing the world through Judd's eyes. You care about what he cares about, and he cares about this woman. It is at this point both Benoit Blanc and the audience get a true sense of Judd's calling and the importance of his role. Judd isn't a peddler of fantasy as Blanc previously suspected. He's the type of man who would put his own freedom on the line to listen to a woman who is terrified. The last thing her mother ever heard her say was something mean. This is not something Blanc can fix with logic or reason. It's something no amount of science or evidence can repair. Blanc can collect clues, he can bring criminals to justice, but he can't do this. This is something different, something he can't quite understand, but can't help but to appreciate. Benoit Blanc may never be a believer, but he can't deny that what Judd does is necessary. It would be very easy for a movie like this to just say, religion bad, and paint Judd as well-meaning but naive. It would be equally easy for a faith-based studio to make the atheist Blanc into a villain, but it does neither. Instead, it forces the audience to sit in an uncomfortable but necessary nuance. It does not allow the religious their self-righteousness, nor does it allow the atheists theirs. Instead, it relies on a quiet and compassionate understanding, a moment to bask in the moral ambiguity of an incredibly powerful institution. In the end, Blanc does not become a man of faith, nor does Judd lose his. Instead, they stand together in solidarity and grace, with a mutual understanding that each of their perspectives makes the world a better place to live in. Wake Up Dead Man is, in my opinion, a modern masterpiece. A film that should be held up with classics like Night of the Hunter. It is long, but not in a way that drags, and it handles its subject matter with both honesty and compassion. It is both a scathing critique of the church and a reminder of the importance faith plays in the lives of people all over the world. It is pretty rare that the third movie in a franchise ends up better than the first two, but this film proves that good things can come to those who wait. Wake Up Dead Man is not here to stand in the pulpit and morally grandstand like Wicks does. It's there to provide a true, stark, honest depiction of religion that neither shies away from the harm nor condemns it to obscurity. It, like both Judd and Blanc, simply wants the truth. It's up to us to interpret the clues and use our own discernment when uncovering the mysteries of faith. Wake Up Dead Man is available on Netflix. And if you like what I do here on the internet, consider donating to my Cash App, Venmo, or Patreon. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And remember, drink a water, eat a food, be kind to yourself, to your neighbor, and to the earth. Thank you guys so much for everything you do. I hope you have a wonderful day, and God bless.